Welcome, everyone, and good evening, and good morning. My name is Yon Pak, and I'm the Senior Director and Associate Professor of Integrative and Field-Based Education at Union Theological Seminary, and I'm on the board of PanAutumn. And I'm pleased to welcome you to this webinar, introducing Asian and Asian North American LGBTIQ+ networks, sponsored by PanAutumn. For those of you who are new to PanAutumn, PanAutumn stands for Pacific Asian and North American Asian Women in Theology and Ministry. To know more of our work, please visit our website, www.panaawtm.org, and follow us on Twitter at PanAutumn. And we also have a YouTube channel where you can find the recordings of our past webinars. And I also want to encourage you to support our work by donating online by visiting our website. We would like to thank the Volunteers of America for providing this platform for our webinar and for IT support. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. Please put your comments and questions in the chat box. Lisa Pratt will monitor the chat box. She will be our chat box queen for the evening and for the morning. So this conversation is just that, a conversation among colleagues and friends about the work, the joys and challenges of their work, their passion and vocation for this work of LGBTIQ+ inclusion, activism, justice, and faith. This is a trans-Pacific conversation. Two of our colleagues' work are based in the Asian context, one in Japan and one in Hong Kong. The other two colleagues will speak from the US context. So let me first briefly introduce our conversation partners today. Kristine Chong is a second-generation queer Korean woman, Korean-American spiritual caregiver, facilitator, editor, and weaver. She draws on her spiritual lineage of Korean indigenous and ancestral wisdoms and freedom fighters, intra-religious contemplative practices, and Korean Immigrant Church. Graduate of Union Theological Seminary with an MDiv in ethics and University of Michigan with MPP in human rights. Some places that house her work are Inheritance Magazine, Volunteers of America, and Franny and Zoe Coffee. And if you haven't tried Franny and Zoe Coffee, it's just amazing. Second, I want to introduce you to the Reverend Dr. Yuri Horie. Is a researcher at Kyoto Human Rights Research Institute and ordained minister at the United Church Christ in Japan. She is the first out lesbian pastor in Japan and also representative of the ecumenical community of queer activism. She is teaching gender and sexuality studies, sociology, and queer theology in universities and seminaries as an adjunct lecturer. Welcome, Dr. Horie, to our conversation. And then next, I want to introduce you to Dr. Hisako Kinukawa, who is a retired professor in feminist hermeneutics of the scriptures, advisory member of Asian Women's Resource Center for Culture and Theology. She is also a member of editorial committee of the journal In God's Image. She will assist with interpretation for Dr. Horie when needed. And then I want to turn to the Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Leung, who is a spiritual director whose perspective has been informed by ministry experience in racial justice education with the United Church of Christ, LGBTQ outreach work with the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies in Religion and Ministry, parish adult education with local congregation, and her doctorate in Christian spirituality. Welcome, Elizabeth. And finally, but not least, we have Pearl Wong, who is a founder and director of Queer Theology Academy that develops queer theologies and promotes LGBTIQ plus rights in Hong Kong and Asia through publication and education. She is deputy convener of Covenant of the Rainbow, campaign toward a truly inclusive church in Hong Kong that aims to stop discrimination against LGBTIQ plus folks in churches and religious community. Pearl is a member of the Global LGBTIQ plus Coalition Group, regular speaker in international conferences on human sexuality, queer theologies, and Asia Pacific rainbow families, and one of the 11 global LGBTI religious leaders invited to speak at the 2017 Ethics of Reciprocity Conference at United Nations headquarters in New York. She holds a degree, BD, from the Divinity School of Chung Chi College, the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Welcome, Pearl, and we're so delighted to have all of you here to participate in our conversation. So this will be sort of an interview style. So we're not having each of you speak in 10-minute slots, but more of a fluid, intimate conversation. So I have several questions that I want to put to you, and I will just go around and ask each of you to speak to the question that I pose. So let me turn to you first, Pearl. So tell us about your work and your organization and what brought you to the work, and what was the calling you felt on your life to do this work?
Okay, thank you, Sue, and thank you for Penultim, that's how you pronounce it, for inviting me. I'm very excited. First of all, I'd like to say what brought me to my work and the birth of my organization 7 years ago is my own painful story, and also a lot of many painful experiences of LGBTIQI plus Christians in Hong Kong. We were condemned, discriminated, and even excommunicated from our own church because of our sexuality as a result of the patriarchal heterosexist Christian tradition still very much practiced in mainland churches in Hong Kong. Now, then I went to study the theology, and my graduate thesis was to propose a lesbian feminist theology of empowerment as movements of resistance, affirmation, and coming out for LGBT plus Christians in Hong Kong. So after graduation, I decided that other than writing about what I advocate, I like to put it in praxis, and it became clear to me that this is God's ministry for me. So just briefly introduce what we do. Queer Theology Academy, founded in 2013 by a group of, like I said, queers who have painful experiences from their churches and because of their sexualities, and also allies who have theological training. Our mission is to advocate for the rights and dignity of LGBTQI plus Christians. So we support, empower, care, and comfort them. Our work focuses on 4 areas. First, publication of feminist and queer theologies in the context of Hong Kong and Asia. Second, theological education. Third, affirming pastoral counseling for the LGBT plus Christians and their families. And fourth is advocacy.
Thank you, Pearl. I want to turn now to Elizabeth and ask you to speak on the same question, the work that you've been doing, you are doing, and what brought you to it, and sort of what was the call of your heart?
Hi. I'll just start by saying that I think many of you know about the Pacific School of Religion. My connection started there. I was affiliated with PSR while I was in my PhD program at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. There are two entities in PSR that play a crucial role in me getting into this work. One of them is the Penner Institute, and I will say a little bit more. And the other is the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies in Religion and Ministry. So these two entities are at the Pacific School of Religion. Both of them belonged to a coalition of individuals and organizations called the Network for Religion and Justice, in short, NRJ. This network was for Asian and Pacific Islander LGBT folks. And this network has been in existence since 2004. The two PSR entities that I mentioned, Penner was a premier institute for API, Asian Pacific Islander Theology and Ministry, and their connections to progressive API churches in Northern California were very strong. And then the other PSR entity, which is the Lesbian and Gay Center for Religion and Ministry, they were uniquely positioned in queer activism in the context of the United States. And they were looking for an opportunity to start their API roundtable at that time. So Penner proposed to the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies to bring me on board to coordinate the network that I mentioned, NRJ, Network for Religion and Justice for API LGBT. For folks who have been involved in API LGBT work, religious API LGBT work in this country, you'll be familiar with this network, NRJ. So when they bring me on board, I have only been trained, I've been trained in academic theology and spiritual direction. So initially I considered myself to be an accidental professional activist in that sense, in answering that call.
Accidental or intentional are led all the same. So thank you for your story. Yuri, can I ask you to go next?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. I'd like to introduce my activities with my peers in Japan. I am the director of the ECQA. ECQA stands for Ecumenical Community for Queer Activism. It's a volunteer group, small group, established in Kyoto, not in Tokyo, central of Japan, not in Tokyo, in 1994. From the late 80s, lesbians and gays started to speak out on human rights in Japan. This grassroots activism has affected some LGBT Christians, including some activists who had been tackling HIV/AIDS issues and tried to bring Christian gender and sexual minorities together. It was the first attempt to create a safe space and organize a community for Christian gender and sexual minorities in Japan. We started a peer support group and published our newsletter to put forward the voices of sexual minorities and create a network among them. In the peer support group, we shared our sexualities and experiences of our daily lives, the relationships with our families, friends, partners, and churches. We had just published the 91st issue of our newsletter. We will continue to publish this paper-based newsletter to actively be inclusive of people who do not have access to the internet. Currently, after the 2000s, there have been many Christian communities that have emerged in Japan, focusing on sexual minorities. Therefore, our mission as the pioneer in this area has become clearer. We still try to provide spaces where sexual minorities feel safe, but our mission now is more on questioning and fighting back the norms such as heterosexism and gender binaries. That is what I consider my mission, my calling of my life. Thank you.
Thank you for your powerful story. And I'm really moved by all your sharings. So I'm going to turn to Kristine and ask you to speak about your own sense of work and what moved you and called you to your vocation of this work.
Hello, it's so good to be here. And this is actually my 4th year anniversary of attending the first Panadim conference. And so I just realized that earlier today and it feels very special. So for tonight's purposes, I'll be sharing about my work as it intersects with the Korean Queer and Trans National Network, which I'll refer to as KQDX from now on. And I am a member of the network, but the reflections I'm sharing tonight are from my own experiences and not representative of the network. So I just wanted to clarify that. And since 2019, KQDX has been the first national organization to focus on queer and transgender people of the Korean American diaspora. It's a collective of LGBTIQ people of Korean descent who are building bridges among one another and also with allies to transform the Korean American community to be more welcoming and loving. And I first learned of KQDX in April 2018 when it hosted the Korean Queer Transgender Conference in New York. And I was part of the over 200 Korean queer and transgender individuals and allies who attended. There, a workshop that really touched me was on the topic of spirituality outside of organized religion and also the intersection between spirituality and social justice. And that was one of the first spaces where the Korean lineages of like Donghak Peasant Rebellion and Minjung theology were not only discussed, which I had a lot of like experience in my seminary context where there's a lot of discussion around it. But in this workshop, I felt there was really like embodied practices that tended to the body and self and community. And I recall thinking at that time that, this is the kind of work that I need and I also want to be in community with. And how it relates to my background is that I was in organizing within the immigrant rights movement in California. And years ago, I decided to go to seminary because I felt a deep need for spaces that integrated spiritual and social transformation and where healing and care could be practiced in both like personal and collective spaces. And so the workshop was like really meaningful for me. And the facilitator of that workshop is Sandy Hong, who is a current steering committee member of KQDX. And over the years, Sandy and I found ourselves reconnecting in spaces hosted by Faith Matters Network, which is a womanist-led organization that supports and accompanies community organizers and faith leaders and activists. Sandy and I were both participants of the Daring Compassion Movement Chaplaincy, which gives training on the work of spiritual accompaniment to social justice movements and their leaders. And then we also connected through Faith Matter Network's community care office hours last year, where I was a part of a group of chaplains offering virtual chaplaincy care to frontline organizers and faith leaders who were, dealing with the realities of COVID and also social uprisings. And so through me like encountering Sandy in that space, we just found it remarkable to be in a space of spiritual accompaniment and exploration that was able to center our Korean identities and also intersecting experiences. And so from those conversations, Sandy has invited me to collaborate on KQDX spaces. And I just wanted to share that I think that my involvement with KQDX stems from like an ecosystem of care and resilience that and spaces led by queer and womanist groups. And so I feel that they have really nourished and activated my work as a spiritual activist and chaplain in ways that I could not have imagined before. And I do consider my emerging work with KQDX as part of like movement chaplaincy work, and also the work of practicing spirituality that decolonizes and reclaims and reimagines the intra-religious and multiplicities that exist within the Korean diasporic context.
Thank you, Kristine. So the next question I have for you all has to do with, and you kind of touched on this, right? What issues and needs and hunger does your work hope to and have been addressing in your particular context? And some of you already touched on it, but just go a little bit further about what do you see as the need? What was the hunger that you found that kind of pushed you into that work? I'm going to ask Kristine to go first.
Sure. So Sandy and I are currently exploring and hoping to integrate accompaniment care and ritual spaces that are responsive and relevant to the KQDX community within our current realities of COVID and heightened anti-Asian racism and violence, and the reality that a large portion of the community may also be undocumented. And then the surplus drain that queer folks who may be isolated or have had to shelter in place during COVID with either non-safe family members or in just various housing contexts. And so what we've proposed to the Queer Steering Committee is to have modes of 101 accompaniment chaplaincy care that is culturally attuned, queer and transgender affirming, and also spacious of the varying spiritualities that are represented in the group. And we've also proposed to gather collective spaces to observe grief and mourning rituals, that we would collaborate with culturally specific practitioners, whether they be mudangs or shamans, or Buddhist nuns or energy workers, to give space for the accumulating and just really overwhelming feelings of loss and grief and rage in this time. And our proposal for this actually originated from a national grant opportunity that was focused on chaplaincy care during COVID. And that's why we wanted to integrate the accompaniment care model. And we didn't get the funding for that, but we decided to explore other paths to sustain this work. And in the midst of this proposal, Sandy and I were also recognizing the need to support and amplify the work of spiritual practitioners of Korean descent and the ways in which intra-religious, liminal, and multiple belongings are a key aspect of their practice and experience. And so I share all this to point to, I think, the focus of multiplicity and liminality as key dimensions to the intersections of queerness and diasporic context, and also intra-religious lineages. That's sort of the lens in which we're considering spiritual care for queer and transgender Korean American folks, and also wanting to hold complexity of the diversity of queer communities that are of Korean descent, because they comprise of transnational and transracial adoptees, people of mixed heritage, first 1.5 and second generation experiences, and recognizing that the disassociations from and also perhaps desire for various ancestral, cultural, and spiritual connections would manifest in many different ways. And so I think that's sort of the thing that is guiding our discussion and how we're engaging in thinking of spiritual care spaces.
Thank you. And, especially during this time, aftermath of the Atlanta shootings, and we've held a vigil last Friday as Penautumn, and there was a lot of grief, anger, and need for the space to come together and mourn and rage and heal together. So yes, so thank you for that work. Thank you. I'm going to turn to Pearl as the next person to address the same question. What needs or hunger do you see in the work that you are addressing in your own particular context?
Yes. Okay. Now, first of all is the need to provide an education of feminist theology and queer theologies, we realized that all the seminaries and mainline churches in Hong Kong, with the exception of Divinity School of Chongqing that I, graduated from, they teach patriarchal and heterosexist theologies. And, the identities and voices of sexual minorities are just being ignored. And when we introduced queer theologies, feminist theologies, and biblical interpretations from the perspective of LGBTQI plus Christians, they consider us heretics. They just want to burn us, like they burn the witches. So therefore, pedagogy of feminist theology and queer theologies are essential in the context of Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan, because we share similar situations. So in the year of 2014, we organized the first Asian Chinese queer theology project in Hong Kong, and subsequently in 2019, we organized the second one. Now it took us 5 years apart, reason being, fundraising. The first project we did in 2014, I would say we don't get any funding. We can't get any funding from Hong Kong government, from churches, from any organization in Hong Kong. We only needed like 20,000 US. So eventually, I think a lot of you know about Reverend Dr. Patrick Chang. So he helped us get the funding from Argus Foundation, and he also became one of the, the teaching core team, and he came over to Hong Kong. So the participants are they are LGBTQI plus Christian leaders in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. So we brought them together for a week-long inclusive workshops on queer theologies, feminist theologies, queer biblical interpretations, queer pastoral counseling, and sexual ethics and history of LGBTQI plus movement. So in 2019, we're very happy that we have 33 participants, not only from Hong Kong, other than from Hong Kong, Taiwan, mainland China, they from Singapore, Malaysia, and even from the USA. So we're very happy, and we see the need of, such kind of workshop. I don't know when we can do the third one, like maybe 5 years from now or whatever. Second, the issue that we want to address is the publication of queer theologies in Chinese language in Asian context. Now, this is really very, very rare. I mean, probably that in the context of Asia or even in Chinese language. So, when we study theology in Hong Kong, it's 99% is in English, 1% is probably few percent in Chinese, but not on queer theology. So we see that need. So we published a series of books called Sexual / Beings. The book one, it touched on the topics of sexuality, which is taboo within the churches in Hong Kong. And also we challenge the pastoral approach to sexual minorities. It's conversion, therapy. So book two, it's titled Who Isn't Queer? Queer Theologies in the Context of Hong Kong. And this is the first public discourse of queer theology in Hong Kong. Thank you, Donald. Yes, written by LGBTQI plus Christians using their own experiences to do theological reflections. Now, one thing that I like to share with you that's very interesting. So eventually, one of the biggest Christian bookstore in Hong Kong called Logos Bookstores, they carry and sell our books. However, they put a plastic wrap on it and they have a warning saying that this book touches on controversial topics, and please don't read it unless you are an experienced or seasoned Christian. But we're very happy because it helped us sell our book. So book 3, which is our latest one, is called Queering Hermeneutics in Asian Chinese context. Now, this book features 18 authors from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and China. It took us 2 years to, from preparation to publishing it. Our goal is to rediscover the silent queer voices in the Bible, an interpretation done by queers at witness of the good news. And third issue, of course, is pastoral counseling. We offer pastoral counseling and support group to LGBTQI+ Christians and their families. Also training courses for volunteers of this program. We also publish an online meditation booklet called Walking with Our Queer God Weekly Reflection. So basically we focuses and addresses, those 3 areas. Thank you.
Wow. Is that translated into English?
Okay, now, Sue, our next project is to select, from articles from the 3 books and translate it into English. Because whenever I attended, like international conferences, they always at the end ask me, so do you have an English, version? I said, I'm sorry, it's work in progress. Now, what the work in progress is, first, we have to raise funds. That's the most, But however, at the same time, we are in the process of selecting and translating. But unfortunately, it's actually difficult to find enough translators to do that in English to Chinese. But probably, some of you or all of you can give me some just suggestions. Yes. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. Thank you. So we heard from Kristine, who's working on the grassroots for the people who are experiencing, whether it's movement chaplains and providing the spiritual care and spiritual space. And then we also see the work that's being done to target or to ensure that people who are studying theology in theological schools and institutions and churches are being made aware of the issues by publications and conversation and theology. So we have various different approaches here. So I want to then turn now to Elizabeth and see if you can speak to the needs and hunger and issues that your work address in your own context.
I think the formal work that I was involved in was between 2007, I think 2007 and 2011. So the context is like 10 years ago, like almost a decade ago, in the United States. So at that time, there wasn't a lot of LGBT positive religious voices. So one of the major task or mission of the Network on Religion and Justice, NRJ, was trying to do is to create a space for LGBT positive religious voices. And related to that is to seek to shift a culture of silence on LGBT existence and acceptance, to shift that from a culture of silence to one of visibility within the Asian Pacific Islander religious community, faith communities. And related to that, we try to educate and to organize API faith communities, because I think there was a lot of activists among progressive API communities, and there are also a lot of non-religious API LGBT activists, to bring those two together to see the connection. So as in the final goal is to nurture and to foster efforts towards a full LGBT inclusion in the API community. And one very important line of work that we did 10 years ago, or started 10 years ago, is to nurture and grow leadership that is LGBT, that is religious, and that is API. So all those intersections that Kristine was mentioning, because just as there are multiple marginalization there are also multiple needs in those areas. So that's basically what my work was involved, with. And of course, it's not just me, right? I was involved with a coalition of individuals and organizations, and a lot of API progressive pastors, pastors from API Progressive Church. At that time, we didn't hear as much from the API evangelical communities in the United States. There are a few API evangelical pastors who want to engage in those work, but they are kind of on the down low because they want to be able to sense the kind of support that within their communities before they do they would do anything. So my work was like 10 years ago, and those were the issues that we were trying to address.
Thank you. And I think it's just a reminder too that, we have intersection of issues happening here. It's not just LGBT, but it's also whether it's gender, whether it's race, so there are intersections of issues coming together that creates the needs, a multiplicity of needs. So thank you. And Yuri, I'm going to turn to you next for the same question. What issues, needs, or hunger does your work address in your context?
There are aspects of my work as a researcher and as an activist that I would like to comment on. I see queer theology as both activism and theory working as two wheels. There is hardly any opportunity to study feminist theology, let alone queer theology, in seminaries in Japan. Even though there are classes offered in academia, sadly, there has not been a clear bridge between academia and activism. This is my supposition. Why not connected? I think there are three major reasons. The first one, the population of Christians is only 1% in Japan. Second point is there is hardly any kind of homophobia and transphobia rooted in the US Christian fundamentalism. Third one, however, there is families influenced by Shinto that has played an important role in policy making. Shinto is a Japanese religion related to the emperor system. I am concerned that there is a trend among sexual minorities to privatize sexuality-related issues within themselves. The focus has been on churches that are comfortable only for themselves and the creation of exclusive space so that they can continue worship without being bothered by transphobic, homophobic Christians. If this attitude continues, society does not change because there is no real perspective of intersectionality. The concept of intersectionality is essential, for it allows us to bring issues such as disability, poverty, violence, race, ethnicity, and so forth into the LGBT context, both outside and within the Christian context. A similar situation exists. Diversity can be celebrated at time, but there is very few serious critiquing of the norms. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, the issue around intersectionality comes through, and Yuri was talking about how not to, you just say, privatize sexuality issues in, I guess, the silos of their own, but to have that conversation across differences, right? So we take that as a good reminder. So thank you about that. And so the third question is, what challenges do you or did you face doing this work? This is not easy work. This is a work certainly of someone who's been called to do this work, and you need commitment, passion, and something driving inside you, right, to be able to do this work. So what challenges did you face? And I'm going to ask Yuri for you to start with that question number 3. What challenges did you face in your work?
I would like to introduce one of the challenges that I faced in my work. In the United Church of Christ in Japan, UCC Japan, our denomination, an incident of discrimination occurred in 1998 when a gay theological seminarian came out as took an exam to become a pastor. During UCC Japan Executive Committee meeting, a male member, also a pastor, Reverend Mizuo Ito, declared we should not admit people into the ministry who intend to engage in homosexual behavior. Before this incident, I, as a lesbian, had already come out of the closet in 1994 after taking an exam to be certificated as a pastor or ordained pastor before my ordination. On that occasion, my sexuality as a lesbian was not considered a problem at all. It showed that only gay men are stigmatized, but lesbians are made invisible because they are women. Some people at the meeting spoke out in opposition to his statement, and withdrawal was demanded. The gay seminarian passed the exam and became a pastor. However, the protestation did not end and became a big wave of resistance by women. Until 2004 or something, most women who engaged in the movement identified themselves as heterosexuals. Then they came to support the ECQA, our group too. It was a turning point for ECQA in its shift from peer supporting community for sexual minorities to an activist community that fights against homophobia in church and Christianity in seeking common issues with heterosexual women. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you for your witness. Now I'm going to turn to Elizabeth. What challenges did you face or do you face doing this work?
So I just speak in general, and it was work in past, that was 10 years ago. I've been thinking back to those years, and then I see it through the racial justice work I have done since then. And also some of the pastoral work that or spiritual director work that I came across with queer folks or queer of color. And I think that the challenges in the work back then and sometimes continue to now is that, similar to the challenge of white entitlement in anti-racism work in this country, there is also the challenge of heterosexist indifference to LGBT justice work. Not blatant, but I think for folks who consider themselves, progressive, I'm talking about among API folks, that sometimes I don't quite understand why there is a disconnection between certain kind of justice work and LGBT justice work. So I can only attribute it to heterosexist indifference in some way. And similar to internalized racism and sexism among non-white people and women, there is also the challenge of folks, particularly API religious folks, recovering from a kind of internalized religious shame for their LGBT bodies. And so those are kind of, I would say, is a foundational kind of challenge, and then it manifests as we were doing organizing, or we were issuing letters or speaking out. I think it manifests there about some of the language and the hesitancy. So there are challenges in general. I would also mention in my work with NRJ as a coalition organization, that there were institutional challenge. I came to working with the Network on Religion and Justice, NRJ, let's see, 2000, like 4 or 5 years, 4 years, I think 3 or 4 years after they begin. And then when I start work during my tenure with them, they are kind of part 1 and part 2 of institutional support. In my first 2 years working with them, as I mentioned before, there were the Panna Institute and the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies. They were critical entities in the Pacific School of Religion that brought me on board to work in this work. And so the first 2 years of my tenure, I have a lot, how do you say, although I was hired by the Lesbian and Gay Studies in Religion and Ministry, but a lot of my support, community support, peer support, and so on, and support from congregations, API congregations, they were funneled through Panna Institute. So in other words, the kind of the foundational assumption about doing this LGBT work in an API context is kind of foundational. You know, there's not a lot of explanation needed for why API, what is important to API community when it comes to LGBT work. With the closure of Panna in 2009, the institutional support kind of shift. And so it shifts from kind of the Panna support that I have to now I'm kind of more full-time, although my job was part-time, under the supervision of the Lesbian and Gay Studies Center in Religion and Ministry. And their approach to API LGBT work is, they call it an API roundtable project. So, so by default, it is a kind of white-dominated environment, funding, and so on. So that's why it's an API roundtable project. And so I think that there is a shift of energy, especially from API communities. There's a shift of energy. For me, it was also a shift of sensibility, that some of the sensibility I can assume previously, I cannot assume now. So that was difficult for me working in an institutional environment. So I mentioned the general challenges and then the specific challenges during my tenure at the work.
Yeah, thank you. It matters how you're connected to the institution, and that's thank you for that wisdom. Pearl.
Yes. Okay. The challenges, okay, it's actually there are a few aspects. First of all, I already mentioned it's theological, like the patriarchal heterosexist theologies and biblical interpretations of all the seminaries and churches, mainline churches in Hong Kong. We have to challenge, the fundamental theology. And in Hong Kong, I mean, there are about, including Catholic churches, Christian churches, there are about, there must be like over 1,000, 1,200, churches, different denominations. But there are only probably 3 affirming churches. Now, I'm not saying friendly, welcoming. I'm saying affirming. Okay. Yeah, only 3. So that is what we're up against. Also, that's the second aspect, the traditional church doctrine and the practices about sexuality. It's a taboo topic. You better not talk about it. So that's the third aspect is, of course, it's our Chinese culture and the society is still very much patriarchal and heterosexual centered. So we are actually up against our own culture. Now, although people see Hong Kong as cosmopolitan, okay, there are a lot of like foreigners living there, and there seems to be a very liberal, open-minded society to a certain extent. But we have to look at whoever the people that are in authority. For example, government officials, they are really, really conservative Christians, churches. So I would say it's, again, the challenge is from our own Chinese culture and society. Now, another one, this is actually it's not interesting. I mean, how do I say it? It's actually quite sad, I would say. It's from the LGBTQI plus Christians themselves, because they develop this internalized homophobia, attending their churches, and they accumulate this shame and guilt and see themselves as sinners, and they must, they have to confess, they have to convert. And therefore they find our perspective too provocative and controversial. Like when we first run, like theology workshops, courses for, anyone. Basically, we want the LGBTQI plus Christians to come, but most of them, they come, but most of them find us, like I said, too challenging to their basic, to the faith, to what they have been believing. And finally, last of all, of course, is the political situation in Hong Kong, since the national security law that have passed, things have been really going downhill drastically. Of course, churches are being threatened. We see that it's coming because, first of all, we see that there's a pastor who's quite outspoken. He already has, he fled to Taiwan. And recently, there's an American pastor from quite a dominant church, in Hong Kong. He said that someone warned him softly and asked him to leave Hong Kong. Now, so basically, I mean, LGBTQI plus this issue or sexual minorities, we know that in China, it's a taboo and it's against the law. It's not something that, the Chinese would advocate for, or they actually would see you as abnormal. So we see the point. It will come to a point that, the national security law will touch on churches and will touch on, organization like us, okay, who advocates for something that's against whatever, against their belief. And when I have time, I share that. I just told Sue at the beginning, I mean, before this, we start the conversation, I am now a diaspora in Vancouver because my executive committee of my organization told me not to return since I'm out here. And in our past history, we received funding from, the USA, from, other countries. So we are, like basically receiving foreign influence and networking. And that's something that is challenging to the national security law. So I think the last one, like I said, the political situation is probably, for now, is probably, the most challenging to us in Hong Kong.
Thank you. It goes from the personal to the political, very quickly. And I know that one of the questions in the chat was asking that very same question. So thank you for addressing that. Kristine.
Yes, for me, as someone who, was raised in the Korean immigrant Protestant church context and ideology, and also being a part of and adjacent to like Christian spaces today, I think that Christian supremacy and hegemony is something that I continuously, am reckoning with and trying to dismantle in like my own care practice and how I'm showing up in spaces, especially that are of diverse and multiple spiritualities. And my experience of the Korean church, involved homophobia, transphobia, purity culture, punitive atonement theology, and other teachings that, I'm still working to dismantle and heal from. And I know that that's something that many queer Koreans and Korean Americans also have experienced. And so the heaviness, right, and the lasting impact of those harms inflicted is something that is both important, but also, sad and full of, I feel a lot of anger and grief and heavy by that. And that's also true to, I think, the modality of chaplaincy as well. Because, chaplaincies as a field, its own roots are tied to Western Christian imperialism, as well as militarized violence and religiously sanctioned state violence. And chaplains who have been, historically embedded and complicit with institutions that perpetuate oppressive systems, such as in the prison or military context. And though chaplaincy, has expanded and includes spiritual care for people of many or no religions and across different contexts today, I find that the institutionalized chaplaincy path, like, for example, to get certified or board certified, is still very white dominant, and it privileges those who have access to the training, the heavy time commitment and low compensation, and also like being dependent on the institutions that will house the chaplains, right? And so I think for me, like, the challenges in confronting these historical contexts and the ongoing realities, both of a religion and a vocation that has been and continues to be a part of systems of power and domination. And so, like, how do I wrestle, right? Like, that's an ongoing discomfort. And I see the impacts of these things, like, in care spaces. And, they're not the only narratives, but they are important ones to, I think, work with. And yeah, I guess to keep going, I tell myself, right, this is being a part of like disrupting and dismantling these systems, and also efforts to reclaim and reimagine spiritual care spaces that can tend to these different lineages and modalities and experiences. And, in working, I think also with like different spiritual practitioners of varying lineages or practices, that I'm just like very aware of like my proximity to Christian hegemony and structural adjacency, just by sort of like, the history even of like US imperialism and neocolonialism in the Korean Peninsula. And so I hope that my work can be a part of addressing and minimizing these harms, but also to co-create like different ways of belonging with others amidst these realities, and also proximities to them.
Thank you, Kristine. And even as we talk about these challenges, I hear embedded in the challenges is the resilience and the unwillingness to give up, right? Even if it is really hard, and you have all kind of hung in there and found out ways to not just to survive, but to thrive. So the next question really is, what do you want to celebrate as what successes you want to celebrate, because it's not all, I mean, yes, challenging, and, you know, what do you want to celebrate? Yuri, you want to take us through that first?
I think it is important to think about how to define success. You may think that we are successful when homophobia or transphobia is eradicated from the church, or it may be to increase the number of churches that accept diversity. However, I have 2 points to think about prior to this. The first point is that communities are always exclusionary. In other words, when someone is accepted, when some people are included, there is a possibility that others are being excluded. The second point is that the church has historically been constituted by heterosexism and its entailing families, which has been strongly influenced by patriarchy. For the church to continue its existence, it must continue to maintain the system that keeps bring people into it, both in terms of mobilization and reproduction. There is a parallel between the patriarchal nation states' emphasis on feminism and the church's structure. I do not feel that there is a clear success to celebrate right now as a result. And it is more important to generate a process, I think, a way to continue to fight, to foster a movement, as I mentioned previously.
So success not as an end result necessarily, but as a process. So thank you for that. And I think we need to celebrate every little gains that we make, because otherwise the road is just too hard, right? So it's a chance for us to reflect and say, maybe we did not eradicate, like you say, totally, but maybe we moved it an inch this way, we hope, right? So that's a great reminder. It's a process and not just an end result. Kristine, can I turn to you?
Yeah, I want to simply celebrate the act of surviving and of caring and during this apocalyptical time, and also the act of like planting and tending to seeds of care during a pandemic and multiple devastations. And to do that, to me, feels like yakson, which means healing hands. Yeah, and I've been very moved by my collaboration with Sandy, who I've mentioned quite a bit, because it felt very generative and intersectional and emergent. We've co-facilitated 2 spaces so far. One was a peer-led discussion on cultivating Chung, which is a Korean relationality of interconnectedness. And that came in part by our like shared appreciation of Anjo's Heart of the Cross. And so that was like really cool to discuss with the KQDX community. And then the other space, we had a Seollal, a Lunar New Year gathering to observe and practice reimagined Korean rituals in response to our current times. And so, you know, these things have given me hope, these spaces. And as mentioned before, I think that because womanist and queer-led spaces have sort of made possible this work, I'm just filled with deep gratitude. And I'm also thankful for the care lineages of the Korean comfort women activists, as well as queer activists, and the kitchen table accompaniment care that Rosemary Harding and others during the Southern Freedom Movement also modeled in the 1960s. And I just feel like those are all like rich traditions that I feel or experience like in our context today. And finally, I want to celebrate the ways in which spiritual care and ritual spaces are created and shared across and within the KQDX community in the everyday, and that there are many like workshops and gatherings and actions that are led by community members that are both responsive and creative and enable connection and care in really challenging times. And I think that that kind of building and co-creating is really empowering and resilience building for, as Yuri said, like the process, not just certain end products.
Thank you, Kristine. Pearl?
Yes. Well, whenever I want to quit and we run out of money, I will remind myself, like you said, what can we celebrate? So first of all, the outcome of our Queer Theology Asian project has really enhanced the skills of LGBTQI+ Christian leaders in advancing their ministry to provide resources to counter the Christian right in their country that are opposed to equal treatment of LGBT+ persons. And in fact, two of our project participants are now studying theology full-time at Divinity School of Chongchi College. One is from mainland China, and the other one is from Singapore. So both queer, lesbian. We also have former participants from these two workshops that have, either graduated with a doctorate in theology or in a doctorate program about to graduate. And one of them is attending now is Wei Jiang Chen, from the Union Theological Seminary. They have used our publications as teaching material. LGBT+ pastors in Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan also recommend our books to their congregation. Even lay Christians have bought our books from bookstores and probably read it in secretly. Our publication have an impact on, I would say, LGBTQI+ Christians in Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, other parts of Asia, even in USA and Canada, and wherever there are Asian Christians who can read Chinese. Now, in terms of advocacy, we support the LGBTQI+ movement from the perspective of a religious voice through the Covenant of the Rainbow campaign toward a truly inclusive church. Before we exist, the loudest opposing voice to the anti-discrimination legislation on the basis of sexual orientation is from mainline churches and Christian right organizations. So, in Hong Kong, you can imagine that all the LGBT movements, they hate us, they hate Christians. So then we came on the scene and they said, oh, that's a different voice. Yes, and we stand on the stage together with them. We march in the Pride Walk together with them in Hong Kong, in Asia, and even in China. So the Covenant of the Rainbow actually consists of 11 Christian organizations and local inclusive churches in Hong Kong. So our goal of the campaign is to appeal to churches to invite sexual minorities from the margins to the center and to create a very, a truly inclusive environment for them to participate fully in church life. Now, we celebrate this in terms of advocacy, but we actually fail in talking and having conversation with the mainline churches about this work. So I have to, end on this little note that, we're still trying. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Lots to celebrate. Thank you. Elizabeth?
Right. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the Network on Religion and Justice for API LGBT, they began back in 2004. And by 2010, 6 years since its beginning, there exists an organized, public, religious API voice for LGBT justice, where there was none before. So I think that during that 6 year time, a lot of change had happened. And part of it, I think, is I agree with Kristine about Christian supremacy in this country, white Christian supremacy particularly. And I think that for those of us Christians who don't agree with that, there is also a place for our activism. And I think that in the LGBT work, especially for API Christians, there is a place for witness. And this is the place that I think the Network on Religion and Justice has taken up. So as I said, within 6 years of their work, there's a dialogue, there's a progress shown, and there's a community movement for people to join in. And before I left the formal work of LGBT justice in 2011, it has become obvious to me that the next phase is outreach and resource progressives, faith leaders among API evangelicals, which API evangelicals account for the majority of API religious folks in this country. And so, so that was 10 years ago when I left. I kind of, we all know, not just me, but many folks in the progressive API circles, religious circles, know that, there are so many evangelicals in this country, and then, if only we could nurture and foster the efforts of those more progressive among them to do the work. And in the last few years, I think that we have seen some of this, especially on, through social media. Although I'm not formally involved in LGBTI work anymore, but from social media, I've seen groups rising up from Asian American evangelicals, younger generation. I mean, younger than me, but seasoned activists in their own way within their own church, kind of coming out in support for LGBT justice, for all kinds of justice work. And I think that is some success to celebrate. I mean, it's not my success or NRJ's success, but it is something that with the passage of time, looking back, that I can see that there have been movement. And I think that there was, it's, instead of saying sharing success, it's like a sharing of hope, that they are hope and seeds of hope that continue to, planted, germinate, and many people water those seeds and it come to fruition in many ways. And some of those fruits die and change into some other kind of seeds of, justice advocacy. And I think that that's really is celebratory for me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And, our work is not our work, our own work, but it's a communal work. And that's a really good reminder. And what we could do is plant the seeds and water and do the best we can. And hopefully someone else may be able to reap. And so, harvest, right? So that leads to the final question of the evening, which is to say, if you had the magic wand, maybe you don't want a magic wand, but if you did, and sky's the limit, what would be your vision for your future for your organization, this work, or the world? Now that's like a big question, so you don't have to go all there, but why don't we dream? So I'm going to start with you, Elizabeth, because you kind of led us into this conversation about hope and seeding the future. So what would you say would be your vision? What would you like to see happen?
Without meaning to essentialize the experience of API LGBT, I think that API LGBT folks in religious circles has a lot to offer our religious community. If only they knew. I think that there is a kind of giftedness, resilience, a way to think and act outside the box. And I think there's a giftedness, again, without essentializing API LGBT religious folks. My hope, the magic wand, hope that I have is, for our religious community, API religious community, particularly to see that gift and to not be afraid to receive that gift. But again, so in Christian language, I think that's, I ask for the grace of God.
Thank you. Thank you. Yuri.
I don't think the situation will change immediately. So the most important thing that I have learned is the power of finding solidarity in the process. Solidarity within the resistance fighting back, despite of my challenges, such as discourses, activities, words, attitudes related to the social and Christian norms, heterosexism, gender binarism, and feminism. Now and in the future, I would like to seek solidarity. Many people have internal conflicts or struggles, especially people who cannot conform to church norms and live without raising their voices. I see opportunity that arise when different types of pains echo with each other. A crack in Japanese is hokorobi. Hokorobi, it's a word that refers to a space created in fabric unraveling. I metaphorically refer to this as a space created when fabric of power structures and norm unravel. I couldn't send the slide, so I cannot show you, but in order for our pains to echo together, we must continue to raise our voices, create what churches consider noises, and continue this as a part of the process. I consider this to be a queer way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Solidarity in process as a queer way. Thank you. Kristine.
So I want to quote someone because I feel like they've already articulated the kind of vision that I hope for. And this is from the keynote speaker of the KQD conference in 2018, which was Mia Mingus, who is a writer, educator, and trainer for transformative justice and disability justice. And they are a queer, physically disabled, Korean transracial and transnational adoptee. And they said at the conference, what I want for us is healing and transformation. I want us to fight with everything we have, to invest in building the skills and commitment we need to be able to face ourselves and each other, and to do it lovingly, to be able to speak our truths and tell our stories and our secrets without fear of losing each other. I want us to be able to risk being vulnerable again and again, because you cannot build trust without vulnerability, and true love cannot exist without trust. I want us to call on our queer superpowers of desire. And I just really hope that I and the communities I'm a part of can live into this vision and reality of love and truth and trust and desire that Mia describes, so that we can heal and transform with one another.
Thank you. We should have a t-shirt that's called Queer Superpower of Desire. Our next Pet Autumn t-shirt. Pearl.
Yeah, I'm reading a book by Kathy Park Hong, called Minor Feelings, an Asian American Reckoning. As a daughter, I think few of you must know, the author, but as a daughter of Korean immigrants in the States, Hong grew up in shame and suspicion. And the book is an examination of racial identity. Now, I came across this word, identitarian. This word originally means anti-immigrant, political interest of a particular racial and ethnic group that are non-white. So I come to think of it, I said, what if I propose to broaden the spectrum of identitarian to include not only race, ethnicity, but sexualities and people who are deemed minorities by society, culture, and religion. If I have a magic wand, I would want to make identitarian disappear, erasing discrimination, marginalization, and even justification of violence under this label. So our vision of my organization is like the blind Bartimaeus in Mark 10, 46 to 52. I like to use this analogy. The blind man regains his sight because of his faith in Jesus. Our organization is the blind person now. Although we have limited vision or don't see how we're able to achieve or transform this world into a just future for LGBT plus people and all people, we hold on to the faith in Christ for that vision to come one day. Thank you.
Thank you. And elimination of identitarian. So thank you for that. And we have like 2 minutes, and this has been such a rich feast of sharing, of witness, of your work, your insights, your wisdom, your hopes and dreams, and your bodies all here. And I'm just so thrilled that you joined us for this feast of, I would say, feast of witnessing together for the work that you're doing, that you will continue to do, and that will give us hope and vision for the future. Now, I just want to, because the chat room's been sort of like going, and I, appreciate Lisa's, the chat room queen for the evening, has just summarizing a lot of your comments. If there's any burning question from the people who are watching this, from the audience, please put it in the chat room. You have any question for the panelists before everyone is, showing appreciation for your comments. But while we're waiting for that, anybody here among you want to have any comments or further thoughts about hearing each other and what this means for your work going forward, or something you found out you didn't know? Because this has just been an amazing time hearing work in your own context. So I'll just kind of hold the space for that, if anyone wants to jump in here.
There are also a couple of questions in the chat if you want to.
Oh, okay. Lisa, can you read the questions? I don't know if I've seen it.
Sure. We have a lot of people commented. So, has further repression against LGBTQIA plus community in Hong Kong has there been further repression by the mainland Chinese government? And then there's a recommendation for translation.
Right.
Should I answer that?
Sure, Pearl. You touched on it a little bit, but
I kind of touched on it because I said the national security law basically covers everyone: culture, religion, political, non-political. But of course now they arrested and they are going after the political party of the opposing one. So but like I also cited a few examples that pastors who are outspoken. One fled to Taiwan. One American pastor was, being softly warned that he should leave Hong Kong and go back to America. So eventually, and also LGBT, like our sexual minorities, I would say, LGBTQI plus, this is in China or in Chinese government, this is something abnormal. This is not something that they would recognize. So they have to go underground. I mean, a lot of you know that the LGBT plus Christian fellowship in China are all underground fellowship. So probably eventually Hong Kong we will be faced with the same situation. So this is something that it's not a fear, it's happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other final comments from any of you here? I'm just, our chat box is blowing up with appreciation for all your sharing and the work you're doing, trailblazing, everywhere, from the total big national level, political level, to intimate care of ourselves and our bodies, and how you are in that space where you are putting your lives on the line. You're in frontline workers, and with deep, deep, deep gratitude for your work and your witness. I'm just very moved by you all, seeing you all in this space together. And it's made possible because we are on Zoom, but I'm hoping that we could somehow physically be together and give each other hugs and encouragement for the work that we're all doing. So thank you. And I want to thank the chat queen, Lisa, who is, she's a doctoral student in ethics. There she is at Drew. And she is also on PanAutumn board. And I'm just pleased that we have the next generation of leaders participating in leading PanAutumn. So if there is nothing further, I appreciate, and again, I'm going to say this work is being supported by generosity of your support. And if you like to give online, go to our website and the way to give is there. And another thanks for the Volunteers of America for this platform that we're using. And can I ask those of you and the panelists to stay on for a little longer until so I just want to have a final conversation before we all take off. And for the rest of you, thank you for joining. And if you are a woman-identified API person who would like to attend the PanAutumn conference, it's starting, when is it? It's the Thursday after Easter. I can't remember the date, but go to our website and please register. It'll be online. And I'm hoping that if you are even in Asia, I mean, one session, the Thursday evening session will be in the evening. We're trying to make it so that folks from Asia could also join at a reasonable hour. So thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, and keep us all in your prayers because we all need it. Thank you. Good night.